Hello, everyone. Welcome to We Do Better News. We've got a great show for you today. We're going to be talking about Tropical Storm Barry, a new app that helps victims of sexual violence. We'll be talking about zebra mussels and a nonprofit that's battling other invasive species, including zebra mussels. And then we'll be talking to a very special guest, the executive director of We Do Better. So stay tuned for that. And then we'll be talking about rent control, particularly in New York City and parts of the West Coast. So let's get started. So the tropical storm Barry, sometimes was Hurricane Barry, depending on the day. We were getting reports last week that it was about to hit the Gulf Coast, and now fortunately it's starting to move north and the storm has died down. But there was a serious impact. There was quite a bit of flooding. You can see in this photo a man in water about waist deep in New Orleans and parts of Louisiana. And parts of Louisiana that were hit in 2016 from Katrina were expected to get hit again. And what was really fantastic was that as early as Thursday morning, the Cajun Navy had started mobilizing, mostly via Facebook. And the Cajun Navy, if you don't know them, is a grassroots organization based in Louisiana, and they have members in the other Gulf states and Florida and Texas and so on. And they're just a group of people. They're a nonprofit. They put their money together. Some of them own boats. Some of them own 3/4 ton, 1 ton pickup trucks, and they're able to move their equipment and supplies into Louisiana or across the state to help people. And they often perform water rescues and other things. And luckily, they didn't have to do too much to work this time, but I'm sure they did have an impact, and we'll be seeing reports about that probably in the next week or two. But if you do want to check out the Cajun Navy to see what kind of work they do and to give a hand, maybe donate or join them, go check out the description when the show's over. Check out the link that we have there. Now, a tech nonprofit called Caravan Studios has designed a special platform called the Safe Shelter Collaborative. And what it allows people to do is it allows a network of case managers to communicate, to find safe, appropriate shelter for victims of domestic violence or sexual violence or sex trafficking or anything of that nature. And the problem that they're solving is that tens of thousands of people a year seek shelter every day in the United States. I'm sorry, tens of thousands of people need to seek shelter every day in the United States, and so that's hundreds of thousands of people a year. And in 2015, there was a peak day where 31,500 victims were placed. So were actually placed. It wasn't just 31,000 people that sought shelter, but were actually placed into emergency shelter. So it's a huge, huge problem and a huge, huge area for nonprofits to step into. And on that day in 2015, there were 7,728 requests for shelter that were not met. And so while that was a very big day in the shelter world, if you will, it really sparked this group, Caravan Studios, to band together to create an app to solve this issue of when someone needs to get help and needs to go to a shelter and needs to remove themselves from a dangerous situation. Oftentimes what happens is they end up in a case manager's office waiting to get to a place, waiting for someone to assign them somewhere, or they're waiting in line, or they're on hold on the telephone because they don't know where they can go. And they're often in limbo or stuck when they really need to get immediate attention, possibly in a psychiatric sense, for their mental health, or there might be something immediate that's physical that they need to address. And so again, the app is called Safe Night, and it's been deployed in Texas, and it can be used throughout the United States. And it also allows supporters to make tax-deductible donations so that victims can be given a hotel or motel room when a shelter is not available at the time. And so right now, Safe App is available on Android from the Google Play Store and on the App Store as well. And the app has been made available through funding from the Vodafone for America Foundation, the Blue Shield of California Foundations, and the United Way of Metropolitan Dallas. And again, do check it out. It's on the Play Store and it's on the App Store as well. Safe night. In a national park in Wyoming, dogs have been used to detect invasive species such as zebra mussels. So, what do zebra mussels do? Why are they so important? Well, I'm going to show you a photo of these nasty things. So, this is an example photo of zebra mussels, and they can really impact a lot of, they can impact boats, they can impact people, they can impact wildlife, they can impact infrastructure, and they cause municipalities to use more electricity, more water, more irrigation, and they remove nutrients from the water. So if there's a lake or a stream, they can be they can have a really big negative impact, and millions of dollars are spent on removing zebra mussels from the environment. And so the nonprofit in Wyoming is called Working Dogs for Conservation, and they're founded in 2000. They're based in Montana, and they've expanded to Wyoming. And what they found is that they can train dogs in as little as 3 months to detect the scent of these creatures. And then people are able to go and remove zebra mussels from wherever they may be. And so part of the problem has been that they're hard to detect, and then once you do detect them, well, it's too late because they've already grown out of control. And again, go check them out, Working Dogs for Conservation. We'll have a link below to share that story with you. Next, we have Jeff Lewis, the Executive Director of We Do Better, coming onto the show. Jeff is a veteran activist. He has been an activist for years, and he is on the We Do Better team as our Executive Director because he has a special talent for really working with legislators, making things happen, and really rallying people in a grassroots way, because that's the other side of the organization that we haven't talked so much about on the show, is what does We Do Better as a grassroots organization do? And so Jeff's here to talk about that and a little bit about the mechanics behind that. And he'll also be introducing something called the Universal Charitable Credit. All right, Jeff, happy to have you on.
Good evening, Rick.
All right, Jeff. Well, Jeff, why don't you introduce...
I live in North Carolina. I'm a Gulf War veteran. My childhood hero was Benjamin Franklin, who was I do some consulting and advising, and people ask me, well, what do you consult on? And I'll tell them, what do you need? Because I have a pretty diverse background. I was a Class A general contractor in Virginia for a while. Straight out of the Navy. I a cleaning company that in late 2005, early 2006, became a full-time activist. And I spent the better part of 10 years working with the victims of violent crimes and protecting our God-given rights as embodied in the Bill of Rights. So I've had legislation introduced in Congress the past dozen years, the past 6 Congresses. I've written legislation and resolutions at the federal, state, and local level across the country. And I believe in government of, by, and for the people. So we the people, we do better. The we is we the people. And in most circumstances, we the people do a better job than any government entity because we care. Bureaucracies don't care. It's not their job to care. It is our job to care. How did I get involved with We Do Better? Well, I met our founder and chairman of the board, Dan Johnson, about 7 years ago when we were both running different organizations. And Dan was an amazing young 18-year-old at the time who brought some things to my attention about some bad legislation in Congress that none of the baby boomers that I worked with had brought to my attention. And we developed a good working relationship back in early 2012. And we worked on various things over the years together. And Dan came to me in late 2015 and asked me to go with him to Florida to talk to some people that wanted to address some problems. And I said, sure, reluctantly, because I had stepped back a little bit from my traveling, doing the charity work when I became the primary care provider for my 80-something-year-old parents. And the priorities are God, family, country, self, in that order. And it came to the point that family needed me a little bit more than the country did. So I had to step back. But I can't keep my hand out of it because I love helping people and I love helping solve problems. So Dan started another organization which evolved into We Do Better after about a year and a half of our spending a considerable amount of time in Washington, D.C., working with members of various committees on Capitol Hill and various nonprofits and think tanks inside the Beltway. And it became obvious after a year and a half that the solutions that we were looking for were not going to be found in Washington.
So just to summarize, Jeff, so you're saying that in about early 2016, you started working on the legislative side with Dan, mostly in D.C.
Yes.
And so you two spent about a year and a half there. Okay, just wanted to make sure we were on the same track.
Yeah, and we in a nutshell, the problem when I was a child, you generally, if you had a problem, you looked at family first, and then the friends and your neighbors, your community, your church. Government was the last resort. The last place you went looking for help was the government for a wide range of reasons. And things have been flipped on its head over the past few decades to where everybody wants to look to the government first to solve all their problems. And they may not even know who their neighbors are. They're not involved in their community. There was an article written by John Locke Foundation Chairman John Hood last fall called "Freedom Fosters a Culture of Giving." And one of the things he talks about in this article that was published in the Hickory Record, and I can send you the link if you want to share it. But he discussed looking at North Carolina as a microcosm, that we have about 40,000 nonprofits in North Carolina. 30,000 of them are 501c3s, so they're taking tax-deductible donations to run their nonprofits. And these are groups that provide goods and services to the public, as well as some foundations that give grants out. So the United States is one of the most charitable, if not the most charitable people and country the world's ever known. And when Dan brought up transitioning from working at the top with in the swamp in Washington to moving back to the state and local levels, it just made sense. Most long-term solutions, if you're wanting to move the Overton window, start at the bottom, not at the top. And we need to get back to it becoming the knee jerk is to look to yourself, your family, your community first, and government last. And what sealed it for me was what Dan found out about the TAMP program, the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, is an excellent example of government's not the best place to go. Regardless of what the source of the money, if it's coming from the federal government or it's coming from state or local government, the bulk of the money that's being put toward helping people and needy families is going to government, but most of the help they're getting is coming from the private sector, whether it's nonprofits or for-profits or churches or local groups or individuals. That for every dollar that goes into the government-funded programs for temporary assistance for needy families, only about 25 cents on the dollar actually makes it to the needy family. That's a 75% of the monies that governments are collecting and distributing to help needy families is being squandered away in bureaucracy and probably some fraud, waste, and abuse. So if we could, we went looking for ideas outside the box and outside the beltway, and Dan ran across something they were doing in Arizona that is tried and tested for the past 20 years.
Now, so we're about to get into the tax credit. Now, was We Do Better born out of your discovery of the tax credit in Arizona?
No, I won't say it was born out of, but it gave us a place to start a dialogue with both legislators and with nonprofits and the population at large. That I don't care what the problem is that the government is trying to address. If it's not going too well, the general solution that they all seem to come up with, and it doesn't matter which party's in charge, is to throw more money at it. Right. They rarely look at the outcomes. And if we're wanting to address human needs, we need to look at the outcomes and not just what we put into it.
So tell us about what you guys started seeing in Arizona and what's happening now out there.
Well, in 1997, the Arizona legislature passed the Arizona Charitable Credit, and that first year there was only about 3,000 taxpayers that took advantage of it, but it essentially allows individual taxpayers to direct a portion of their state income tax liability to a charity within that state that's addressing human needs. Kind of cuts the middleman out. Some of that waste and bureaucratic abuse that goes on. And it took it a while, and they trimmed it down over the years. They've amended the legislation over the years. And in 2016, they doubled the amount of the credit. And by the end of 2016, they had 130,000 filers in Arizona that were taking advantage of this credit to the tune of $52 million that went into the hands of nonprofits in Arizona. And this was a bipartisan effort to double the amount. We have an excellent video that Dan and Ford Fisher went out to Arizona and talked to both the legislators that had introduced the bill to double the amount, talked to the nonprofits. You can find that at wedobetter.org under Arizona Charitable Credit. I think is under the resources tab. It sums up the benefits much better than I can in the short time that we have here. But it essentially starts putting the focus back where the need is. Nobody knows better in their community. There's no bureaucrat in your state capital or in Washington, D.C. that knows better what the human needs are in your community than the people that actually live there. There's nobody in your state capital or in Washington that's going to hold those organizations accountable that they're sending all this grant money and funding to, like the local people that actually work for the money. But what I liked about the charitable credit is it empowers individuals to make decisions about and not spending other people's money like socialism advocates, but about their own money that they work for, that a small percentage of it, instead of sending it to the state, they give it directly to a charity that they know are helping people in their community.
Yeah, and so what's the next step for We Do Better in terms of the tax credits?
All right, well, we've had it introduced in at least 3 states so far. It's an alien concept to have legislators actually trust taxpayers with their money, with their own money, because they don't think it's the taxpayers' money anymore. Once they get their hands on it, they think it's their money, and they can do whatever they want with it. And they
generally do.
They generally do, and that's why we're trillions of dollars in debt, because they don't spend it wisely. They don't look at solving problems; they just look at managing problems. And as long as they don't solve anything, they still think we need them. Re-elect them so they can solve it next time, or they'll fix it next time because they just couldn't get it done this time. It's a cop-out. So we took what we found in Arizona, and we developed model legislation that didn't just cherry pick. So there's no government bureaucrats or special interest groups picking winners and losers from the left or from the right. It's the individual taxpayer that's empowered to decide for themselves. And if any of you have ever looked at any legislation, some of it's hundreds of pages long, one of the things I've always attempted to do was to keep it simple. And the legislation that we've had developed over the years is rarely more than 2 or 3 pages. And most of it, we try and boil it down to one simple piece of paper, one simple page. What I've got in my hand here is the North Carolina Universal Charitable Credit that's sitting in committee right now in our legislature in Raleigh. If you want to check it out, it's House Bill 894. We have model legislation for any state legislature in the country. We have customized ones that we've done for about half of the states, and if you're in a state that you want to get actively involved in developing a charitable credit, you can write me at jeff@wedobetter.org or Dan at wedobetter.org, and we'll get the ball rolling. Looking at your questions here.
Well, so we've just got a minute left. What would you say to someone that wants to join the grassroots side? Like, what does it entail, and what are the kind of things that they would have to do to get this tax credit out there?
Okay, well, what we're doing here in North Carolina is we're reaching out to nonprofits that are doing a better job than the government's doing, that are helping people in need, whether it's with housing or homeless shelters or drug addiction or health care. There are a variety of organizations that, if you watch the Arizona video, you'll see several examples of how this charitable credit has allowed these generally smaller nonprofits to better serve the people that they're trying to help, or to expand their programs to help those in need. And it serves 2 purposes, or at least 2. There's a lot of folks that have never experienced the gift of giving or helping other people. And we're all bombarded with emails and phone calls all day long wanting us to donate money to this cause or that cause that we've never even heard of. But we also all know people who need help. And there are organizations in every community across the country that both need volunteers and need money to provide the services that they provide. So if you want to get involved in the grassroots, we're looking for volunteers across the country to engage in their communities with the charities and nonprofits that are helping people, to engage their local officials, county council, city council, state legislatures, to introduce legislation to allow the taxpayers to direct a portion of their tax money to a charity of their choosing. And I know you said we got a minute left. I got to get this in. We developed a candidate pledge.
All right.
Which is works for both incumbents who are going to be up for re-election, or for somebody who's considering running for office. And you either trust the people that elected you or that you want to elect you, or you don't. You're asking that you're running for office or you're an office holder, you expect the people to trust you to make decisions on their behalf. All our candidate pledge says is if you are willing to commit to introduce and advance the universal charitable credit, it says I will trust the people who elected me or will elect me to direct a portion of their taxes to the organizations in their community they believe best address human needs. I am a candidate of, by, and for an engaged and empowered people. Together, we'll do better. I support, for example, the North Carolina Universal Charitable Credit. For those that don't trust the people that elected them, whether they will sign it or not, they are de facto saying the second half of this is for those who don't trust the people that elected them. And it says, I wouldn't trust the people who elected me or will elect me to direct some of the taxes to the organizations in the community they think best address human needs. I don't believe the people would make good decisions. I'll do better without their help till the next election. I do not support the Universal Charitable Credit. Or anybody that won't support it, that's what they're saying is I don't trust the people who sent me here to determine where some of their own money goes to help people in need.
Sounds like they got to sign up after they hear that conversation.
Well, we've taken this to both CPAC and to Netroots, so the left and the right, and to some libertarian conferences. And when you talk to human beings at all three of those politically extremely diverse groups, they all love it.
Yep.
It's about as nonpartisan as you can get. And once people get engaged, once people have the option, right now, as Dan has said, if the current system pits the taxpayer against the people that need help, they both feel like they're getting shortchanged, and they are. The more you can cut government out of addressing human needs, the better the people feel about it that are helping, and the better help the people that need it get. We, the people, do better. Always.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on, Jeff. I'm sure we'll see more of you soon. Well, have a good night. And again, everyone, Jeff Lewis, Executive Director of We Do Better. Thanks for coming on, Jeff.
Thank you too, Rick.
Talking about politicians not trusting people, I don't think they trust landlords and renters and home buyers, because look at all these housing policies we've got. I want to talk a little bit about rent control, because it's still a thing. Rent control is not just something you see in movies about New York. It's still going on in New York. It's in Washington, D.C. It's in L.A. It's in San Francisco. Okay, it still affects a lot of people, and it's a really great example of an older school housing policy, and it serves as an example of the impacts of housing policies in general throughout communities. Last week I talked about inclusionary zoning, and you can check out the video on that as well. So this is according to landlord.com. About half of rental units in New York Cities are rent controlled or stabilized, and the rental increases, the annual increases, are determined by the Rent Guidelines Board. And Los Angeles has almost the same number of rent regulated units at 880,000. And in DC, a majority of the units are rent controlled. And these policies they're started in about the 1970s. And they're a response to an initial housing crisis, so to speak, where prices got really high. And a scholar from the Manhattan Institute, named by the name of Peter Salins, has written, before rent stabilization arrived on the scene in 1969, New York built 35 dwellings a year on average. In the early 70s, the rate dropped to 20,000 a year, and a decade later to 10,000 a year. And he also adds that rent control does also lead to abandonment. In San Francisco, a combination of rent control and strict eviction laws force many landlords to accommodate longtime tenants who pay well below market rate, leaving little revenue available to cover expenses. This has caused landlords to abandon, meaning completely give up their units, an estimated 31,000 units, or 1/12 of the city's housing stock. Basically, what they're saying is that through these housing policies, through controlling the rents, landlords are not able to pay their bills and to maintain properties. And up to an eighth of San Francisco's rental properties have gone basically down the toilet. And look, most of the time, the case against ending a policy like this, like rent control, is this idea that you're going to put grandma out on the street. And there's a couple of things I want to say about that. First, a lot of times, people that live in rent-controlled units in these cities are not poor. In New York, the upper limits of qualifying for a rent-stabilized apartment are an annual income of $200,000. That's not exactly a low income. Okay, and second, do you have to live in that city, particularly if you're elderly? There are cheaper places to live in the world that are close by and that have plenty of the same services as a New York or an LA. There are other options out there. And there are charities that help with this. There are plenty of nonprofit developers, and we'll have a link to affordablehousing.com that goes and they talk about and they list developers and owners of buildings that sometimes the companies are actually nonprofits, and sometimes they build units specifically for lower income people that are below a median income in a city. They're building housing for people, for everyday people, right? There are people doing this all the time. So there are lots of excellent examples in links below. And look, when you have these, rules after rules after rules, you've got property taxes, you've got regulations, you've got zoning, you've got rent control, it becomes very, very difficult to build new units. And the laws of supply and demand dictate that the only way to get lower prices is to increase the supply of units. And in cities where rent is cheap, it's because there's lots of units available, because people were allowed to build as many units as they needed to. And so take a look in your city. What are the housing policies? Are they having an impact on developers and builders and homeowners and people that want to rent? Are the rules really strict? Because we're not getting an apples to apples comparison of what would it look like without all this unneeded regulation. And what it looks like with all the regulation. I mean, you could look at City A versus City B. You know, City A has X amount of regulation and City B has 2X. But these policies need to be repealed, and we need to lean more heavily on nonprofit solutions, just being practical about where you live, and, you know, looking towards the community rather than slapping on a new rule for new development. So again, thanks everyone for listening. This was We Do Better News, brought to you by We Do Better. And we are a grassroots organization, and we are funded by donations. So please support the show at wedobetter.org/donate. Become a founding donor, become a recurring donor for us, and really help us to produce more content, to produce higher quality content, to create more shows, and to deepen our impact in the community. And if you want to get involved, go to wedobetter.org and hit the Get Involved tab, and you'll get a mess. You'll be reaching out to folks like me and Jeff directly by doing so, and we'll have a conversation with you about what it means to get involved with us and the impact that you can have. And also check us out on Facebook, and go ahead and like, subscribe to the videos, comment, and hit the notification bell to find out when our next video is. Again, my name is Rick Rifkin, coming to you live from Austin, Texas. Thanks so much for watching.